my parents are here in the box that says Larry Wilhoit, and they just got their second vaccination shot this morning. So feeling so grateful to God. Baruch Rofei Cholim. Let's thank God for all of those things, but also for the pleasure of learning Torah together with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so Parshat Truma is that this is where the Torah starts to get boring, right? Like it's a very, very technical Parsha. It's it's an assembly manual, right? Quite literally, and it's very, very very detailed, very technical, not the most exciting reading in the Torah, but even as line for line, it doesn't necessarily dazzle. It does present us Parshat Truma with some of the most vexing theological problems in the whole of the Torah. The first and most frequently discussed is the most famous line from Parshat Truma, the one that you're always, if you hear a rabbi talk this week of the year, you're always going to hear them talk about this first line here. It's a really famous line. Vasuli mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham. Make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So that's just a crazy, crazy idea. God's going to dwell among us. God's going to come down. What does that even mean? Can God be? Is God a thing, a presence? And presence is the right word. This is where we get the word Shekhinah from, right? From that root to dwell, to be here, present among us. So that already is quite a bold statement that the Torah makes. But we're going to look at perhaps an even more vexing problem, at least for our theology, which is the appearance of the Kruvim or cherubim. The cherubim. So let's take a look. It's funny. I think the translation into English is cherubim, right, which is the Hebrew plural, and we have that word in English, cherub, kruv. But what's a cherub? So that's one of the things we're going to try and figure out. So here's a source sheet for you all, and every year I am just like I'm returning to this first passage that we're going to look at and trying to figure out what the heck are these things? What are these things, and what are they doing here? Okay, so that's what we're going to try and figure out today. So let's take a look. Let's get right into it. Okay, so there. The whole, as I said, an assembly manual. What are we assembling? We're assembling the Mishkan, right? Make for me a sanctuary. The sanctuary, the portable temple in the desert. And in that temple are all kinds of things, a menorah and a table, but there, most importantly, there's the ark. The ark, which will hold the tablets that the Ten Commandments are written on, right? The tablets of the covenant. So the tablets are placed into this ark, and the ark is this golden ark. Now, there's a lot of beautiful, like, metal shining golden stuff in the tabernacle, but nothing more radiant than the ark. Okay, fine. So there's a golden ark. That shouldn't surprise us. But then suddenly we get these kruvim, these cherubs. So here they are. You shall make a cover for the ark of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Make 2, here it is, cherubim. Make 2 cherubim of gold, right? In the Hebrew, it's kruvim. Make 2 cherubim of gold, make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other cherub at the other end. of one piece, meaning they are attached to they're just a part of the same metal, of one piece with the cover, shall you make the cherubim at its two ends. Okay, so imagine a little like treasure chest, and there's a cover on top, but the cover has figures actually I've already said too much because it hasn't said anything, but now we get a little bit of a description. The cherubim shall have their wings spread out above, shielding the cover with their wings. They shall confront each other, face each other, let's say. The faces of the cherubim being turned toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark after depositing inside the ark the pact which I will give you. That pact is the edut, the testimony, which I will give to you. There I will meet with you, and I will impart, and this is an important line. Oops, sorry. There I will meet with you, and I will impart to you from above the cover, from between the two cherubim that are on top of the Ark of the Pact, all that I will command you concerning the Israelite people. Okay, so they're not just there, but they're important. I mean, this is a big deal. So here, okay, I want to try and figure out what the heck these things are, and that's what we're going to spend a lot of our time doing. But before we get to that question, before we say what a cherub is, and some of us have images already in our minds, what are they doing there? What are they there for? Just from the text, or from at least your intuitions, what are some of the things what is the task that the cherubim seem to be performing, or at least in service of? All right, Wendy, you've got answers.
Protecting. There's there's a demarcation. This is, and it's almost like a line. There are, this line is it's a separation. Separation also sanctification. That's very isn't kiddush. I mean, that's what makes holy. We separate.
Good. Okay. I want to just first of all ground your first interpretation here in the text. They are protecting. What's the word that we might say is protecting? They are above sochachim, right? Shielding, or this is the same root, or at least close to the root for sukkah, right? They are, and this is both of Wendy's interpretations are kind of encapsulated in this word. They are protecting, shielding, but also they're drawing a boundary line. They're the sukkah, like they're the layer between the lower and the higher, between the ark and, I don't know, God itself, right? Okay, other thoughts, Noah?
Yeah, whenever I read this Torah portion, I just pictured the ark from Indiana Jones' Raiders of the Lost Ark, and see them as sort of the boundary line, and like sort of they're facing each other, so like the boundary line that's demarcating, like this is the actual covenant, and this is what's like protecting it, like Wendy said, and making it so distinct that whenever anyone from the tribes of the Israelites sees this, they'll know precisely what's in it, and to really be a marker of respect for all the priests and whoever are dealing with the ark. Okay,
great. So first of all, just picking up on your last comments there, the tablets are in there. The most sacred object that we have that exists in our tradition are there. So they are there to keep safe, and as Noah says, to sort of highlight, look here, this is the important thing. But I love the reference to Indiana Jones, because there's also a sense they're not just protecting the tablets from us, they're protecting us from the tablets, or maybe from God's appearance above them. But there's something in when they open the ark in Indiana Jones, everybody's destroyed. There's some power there. Remember, the ark is placed behind the curtain in the area known as the Kadosh HaKadoshim.
Holy of Holies.
The Holy of Holies.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's like, that's not a place that we are allowed to go, right? Only the priest goes, the high priest goes there, and only once a year. So yeah, so some kind of protection for us, right? Possibly as well. Okay, take a couple more comments. Alexandra?
To me, it seems like they're a teaching tool for this sort of new people who are developing a new relationship with God. And because there isn't really a need for that in order to connect with God. There isn't really a need for God to say, I'm going to meet you here, and this is what the place looks like. God can show up anywhere and meet us anywhere. But I think it's a teaching tool for people who are developing a relationship with God, who need some kind of a physical touchstone. And that physical touchstone is like so precious that you can't even really see it, but that there is a physical representation of God's world. And the cherubim are, like, as I understand it though, like lowest level of the angels. And so it's like a beginning relationship teaching tool is how I see it.
Okay, that's a very nice description, but embedded in that description is all of the problems that the existence of the cherubim surface for us, which is that, as Alexandra says, there are these physical idols. I mean, there are these objects. And Alexandra says, well, maybe, now let's begin to understand that. Why might we need a physical representation? Because God is so mysterious, and it's just, maybe it's, a transition for us, or maybe it's just like natural for humans to need a physical object. But whoa, that's our whole religion, right? Like, we don't do that, right? Lo taseh lecha pesel, don't make yourself a sculpture. That's the second commandment. So whatever they're doing there, aren't they forbidden? Aren't they the most? They are the thing that most glaringly smacks of idolatry in all of the Torah. These golden statues. How could this possibly be? All right, I'll take one more comment and we'll move a little further. Florine?
I'm going to speak in terms of imagery. You're right when you say the word transition, but I look at it more as a spiritual transition. I see them as the harbingers of the feminine and masculine dimensions of Hashem, leading down inside of the tabernacle to the eventual union.
And in that description, Florine, are you thinking of the cherubs themselves as sort of two forms, masculine and feminine?
Right, the dimensions of God, the feminine and masculine, then pulling us down into which would be Shabbat, which would be the eventual unification.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Okay, now we're kind of getting into it. Now, I wanted to clarify, because there are a couple ways of speaking of the masculine and feminine here. One is that God in our literature often takes the masculine gender just as a matter of noun, but Shekhinah, right? Just as a noun, has a feminine gender, and so the tradition has come to think of those as two aspects, masculine and feminine aspects of God. Some of you have surely heard this before. The Shekhinah is the female presence of God. Now, that's a little bit of a mystical riff on just the gender of those nouns. Hebrew is, like many languages, has gendered nouns. But Florine also imagines that the cherubim themselves are like the male and female form. Now, I was going to save this source until the very, very end. I was going to blow your mind with this source, but because Florine has already surfaced it, let's just go down to the bottom of our source sheet and take a look. This beautiful passage from the Talmud. Rabbi Kahana said, when the Israelites would go up to the pilgrimage festivals, they would pull back the curtain and show them the cherubs who would be intertwined with one another, and they would say, look, your love before God is like the love of a man and a woman. Okay, so amazing, Brucha Shekivant, amazing, like that kind of imagination that Florine brings to us. The rabbis also, now this is, I mean, this is a little bit of a kind of a tall tale, but I don't know if the rabbis are saying that is what the cherubs look like, but there is some idea that perhaps that's what they represented. Okay, let's begin to talk about what they looked like. And let's just start. We have the notion of a cherub in our mind. I think many of us we even say the phrase that that kid has got the face of a cherubic like dimples, right? And that comes from Renaissance representations. Here's the most famous. I'll show you just from, you may have seen this one before, but from Raphael, right? You seen this before? Those are Raphael's cherubs, right? Now that, let's go from Raphael to Rashi. That is exactly the way Rashi describes the cherubim. Rashi says cherubim, they had the form of a child's face. Dmut partsuf tinok lehem. Okay, so that goes way back, and it goes even further back because Rashi is borrowing it from the Talmud. That suggests a derivation for the word, which I find a little dubious. But the Talmud says, "My kruv." What is a? It's funny if you know modern Hebrew because kruv is like cabbage, right? So it always sounds a little funny. But what is a cabbage? What is a cherub? What is a kruv? Rabbi Abahu says it means like a baby, k'ravia. For in Babylon, meaning in Aramaic, they call an infant ravia. Okay, so keruv is k'ravia, like a baby, just like a baby. Okay, I mean, that is the most famous representation of the cherub, but it's a little fishy, like that the Hebrew word is actually like an Aramaic phrase instead, like a baby, where it not sure. I'll just throw out one more before I open it up to your speculations. But Rashi's grandson says something entirely different. The Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, that's Rashi's grandson, says very simply, kruvim, ofot, birds. They were birds, right? So babies are birds. And why is the Rashbam saying that they were birds? Well, obviously, they had wings. So I don't know. What do you think? Like, do either of those, actually, you know what? And I want to throw one more image into the hopper here before I open it up, which is that the cherubs continue to appear because after all, they become these iconic figures later in the temple, the big temple in Jerusalem. And the prophecy of Ezekiel describes cherubs on the vision of the chariot that he has. And he says a funny thing. He says that there were 4 cherubs. And look at this source here. It's very difficult to understand. He says, now the cherubs were standing on the south side of the house when the man entered, and the cloud filled the inner court. And then a few verses later, this is so bizarre. Each one had 4 faces. One was a cherub's face. So like, it's a little hard to understand. There were 4 cherubs, but one of them had a cherub's face, and the second a human face, and the third a lion's face, and the fourth an eagle's face. Okay, so that gets totally confusing, because there we have a bird and we have a human face, and then there's maybe a cherub is one of those, or maybe it's something altogether other. So what do you think? What's your what do they look like? Do you have any of the answers we've given so far make the most sense to you, or do you have another one? Let's see. Payam.
I just have a question. Aren't the angels guarding the Garden of Eden cherubim as well? That seems like a radical different description.
You're too smart for me. I can't, I try to hide the ball a little bit, Payam. Hold on. We're gonna go there in one sec, but you're exactly right. That's the main connection. But hold on. we're going to go to the original cherub soon, and Payam's already there. So just 1 second. But let's continue to what before we even get there, just like we're being asked to sculpt these forms, right? Imagine you're there in the desert and God says, make some cherubs for me. What would you make? Maggie, what do you think?
Well, I want to go back to Rashbam's interpretation of birds, because it just makes me think of the passage where Hashem says, I took you out of Egypt on eagle's wings. So I kind of find the connection there to where Rashbam would think that cherubim are birds because they're eagles, which proof positive with what you just read, the cherubim have an eagle's face. So I think just going back to Indiana Jones, the cherubim are supposed to be this scary thing that are going to prevent people from trying to go and open the ark if they're not supposed to. So kind of in a way, they're protectors. So in order to be protectors, they have to have this scary image of these four faces in order to go, whoa, what the hell is that? And then walk away. So
right, great. Okay, so maybe the cherubim are supposed to be like scary, fierce, terrifying in some way. But Maggie also reminds us that the image of an eagle is one that carries, that escorts, right, that holds. And that is another possibility, that the cherubs with their wings, just like eagles carried us. So eagles are carriers, and maybe they are there to carry the presence of it, to hold the presence of God, although that's a bizarre thing to say. But remember, it isn't just that they're there to protect, right? That is one function that they serve, but there's another big function. God comes down and speaks to us right there. Between the cherubim have their wings outstretched, and God comes right. I mean, you see how we're in real theological trouble here, but God is between these two little idols, right? All right, let's see. Speaking of heresy, let's see what Matt has to say.
Okay, I'm actually not going to be heretical this time, because if I put myself in the place of somebody in there, cherubs are almost God, but not quite, so I can't quite see them. I cannot look at God, and I can look at a cherub, but I'm not really going to know what I can see. So I'm now, heaven forbid, praising Ezekiel because he doesn't know what he's seen. So rather than being a wacko, he's giving me lots of things, because the cherub there's some smoke and some fire and some danger, and I don't know what I'm looking at. So I'm not heretical here. I'm wearing my pious hat.
Okay, all right, great. So that's right. So the cherub, we don't know what it's a bit of a mystery. The Ibn Ezra, actually, one of our great commentators, says that the Torah doesn't give us the exact representation. It was known, but cherub just means form, right? Or image. I love that while Matt is talking about all the faces of the animals and the humans, he's got an animal face there in his own face. Okay, Jen, what do you think?
I'm just really digging into the phrase, there I will meet with you.
Yeah.
Because I think we're taking it oddly literally for something referring to God.
Yeah.
Right. And there I will meet with you. And we're all meeting right now, and we're not in each other's physical presence. We're not, right. So there's plenty of ways to meet with each other. And you can meet with each other because you're seeing something so beautiful that it's struck by the awe of the creation of God. You can meet with God there because of all of the other priestly things going on around this. You can meet with God there because that is the ritual, and that's what you know that you're supposed to do. And you just bring yourself spiritually into an open presence with God. So some of the theological issues that this seems to be bringing up comes from a very literal idea of what meeting means.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, to be fair, the Torah seems to be very physical in its description, but right, what does it even mean to meet with God? And remember, there God will meet with us and communicate with us, but we won't actually be there. We won't be behind the curtain, right? We speak of the tent as the Ohel Moed, tent of meeting. So it's the place where this happens, but you know, what does that even mean? I mean, that is the most significant thing that is happening between the cherubs, and it's entirely, as Jen says, entirely mysterious. All right, let's take one more comment and then we'll move forward. David Subar?
Yes, hi. Put my video on. Sorry, I've been eating, so I've been hiding my video. I've been hiding my face, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I find this whole concept of cherubim disturbing or concerning, because in all of creation, everything is mortal and seeable, except for God. And then there's these cherubs, which happen right early on, but they only happen occasionally, and they're not defined. And so I don't know what to make of it, or with our relationship to God, with our relationship to the universe. What are we supposed to, and maybe this is what we're exploring today, but what are we supposed to understand from that? What are we supposed to understand about the nature of divinity, that there's this creature that's not God and not human, but something else?
That's right. That's right. Thanks so much for that, David. That takes us right to the heart of the matter, because I said the common form is that they're babies, but it isn't babies really. It's angel babies, right? Little angel babies, right? They have their wings, and that's the idea of an angel, which we've explored in this class before, is a word for a kind of middle being between human and divine, a divine being which is not God. Do we really have that? I mean, when we did explore the concept of angel in the Hebrew Bible, we came to understand that it was more like some kind of messenger, often formless messenger, that kind of delivers, maybe just a force of God that delivers God's will. But here we have these real images, and as David said, they come very early on, and Payam has already pointed us there. So let's follow Payam and David to the most important source to consider now that we're here in the book of Exodus and being asked to make these cherubim. Let's remember, as Payam did, that we've already seen cherubim, and we saw them very, very early on, okay, in the Garden of Eden, or actually not exactly in the Garden of Eden. They're just outside the Garden of Eden, okay? Just at the end of that first narrative, when Adam and Eve have eaten of the fruit, and the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and as you'll see, God's a little freaked out by that, and angry, but also, as you'll see, a little freaked out, and drives them out of the garden, and then locks the door and puts right there a couple of cherubim. So let's just take a look here. This is really the connection that I want to explore most in class today. Let's see. Okay, here we are. And the eternal God made garments of skins for Adam. God does a couple of things as God sends them out. First, makes them clothes. Okay, so the eternal God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Very kind of nice. And remember, they were naked, and then they ate, and they were ashamed, and they covered themselves. So now God gives them a full wardrobe. And the eternal God said, now that Adam has become like one of us, knowing good and bad, what if he should stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life? Here, I'm going to try and highlight, because my mother says that that's helpful. So I do what my mom says. Tree of life, and eat and live forever. So the eternal God banished him from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which he was taken. God drove Adam out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden. There's the phrase east of Eden, by the way, that Steinbeck uses. And stationed east of Eden, the cherubim and the fiery, ever-turning sword, right? Like, remember, David was wondering, like, what are these weird things? Yeah, it gets weirder, right? They have a fiery, ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. Okay, so that's pretty crazy, and that a direct connection. These are the only instances of cherubim that we have in the Torah. They're either on the ark or they're those things back in the Garden of Eden. So I want to try and figure out how these cherubim in Exodus are referencing the earlier cherubim. But before we do, let's, this is the way I often work, like two passages in separate places in the Torah that are kind of linguistically connected. And so the Torah is presenting us a kind of an intertextuality that allows us to see one text as a commentary, that both texts really as commentaries on the other. They're in conversation, right? But it isn't just the fact that there are cherubim here and cherubim there, right? There are other connections that we might make in this passage. What are some of the other connections that we might make in this passage? Anybody see anything else in this passage here that reminds you of what we read earlier about the cherubim above the ark? Want to see anything else? What else? Who's got an answer here? I want to really speak this out. Hal?
Unmute. So, I mean, they're both guarding the way to some greater truth or revelation or what have you, whether it's the tree of life or whether it's the Torah. I mean, they're both kind of demarcating that and guarding it. Yeah. So I mean,
that's right. That's exactly right. That's another connection. They are both guarding. We said covering, shielding, but here the word is lishmor, guarding, and they're guarding the way to the tree of life, right? And the tree of life, now, it's a little hard to say what the tree of life is here, but by the time we get to the book of Proverbs, and we all know that's become one of our phrases to refer to the Torah, right? To the Torah itself, which is also represented by the tablets in the ark, right? So cherubim here, cherubim there, guarding here, guarding there, guarding something that evokes the Torah in both places. Okay, any other connection to be made, Hannah?
Yeah, I just noticed that the same verb shows up in both places. Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, and then there's also vayash kain mikedem lagan eden in Bereshit, which I hadn't noticed before.
Oh boy, Hannah wins the prize today. Look at this. That is right. The cherubs are the obvious connection, but look at this. Look at this. Stationed. Now, you would have missed it in English because in English we say it makes more sense to say stationed. But we might say God caused them to dwell there east of the Garden of Eden, and that is the same verb that we use in our primary verb in our Parsha. Make me a sanctuary that I may dwell. See here, shin, chaf, nun, and then down there, shin, chaf, nun, right? So, whoa, like these texts are really in conversation, right? These are really, the Exodus is really playing off of the image of the earlier cherubim. Okay, so Hannah, you get a gold star. What now do we do with all of this? Like what? Okay, clearly these texts are in. I hope everyone's convinced. I mean, you don't really need much convincing since those are the only two places with cherubim, but there's a lot of layers there. So let's start making some sense of it. And I don't really have a complete answer. So what do you all think? Allison?
Well, I think that when we were in the Garden of Eden, like when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, that was the time that they were closest to Hashem, right? Like as humans, we were closest to Hashem when we were in the Garden of Eden. And I want to kind of pick up on something that Jen was saying before, which is about the spatial dimension of meeting with God. Like, what does it mean to meet with? And I guess I wanted to share the first experience that I ever had in my life where I felt the presence of God. Because I grew up not really believing in, like, very secular, you know? And when I was 17 years old, I went to India and I was taken to an ancient temple, like one of the earliest temples that they had found. And this temple was, it was in a cave, like a very low cave. The cave was so low that you could kind of crouch down and look into it and see that there was a shrine in there, but you couldn't actually go into it. And approaching the cave, there were a bunch of like Hindu statues. And I remember the experience of being taken there. It's like a guy on a motorcycle took me there, and approaching it, I saw these statues.
It sounds like a great day.
It was a great day. I saw these statues, and they sort of affected me. Like there was something intriguing about these statues with like multiple faces and so many hands. Something that affected me on this sort of deep level where I remember thinking about the nature of being human, because these Hindu statues do have these multiple faces. And I remember just feeling curious, like, why is this culture creating these images, you know?
Mm.
And then as I approached the cave, I felt something. I felt, it's almost like a feeling of like deep peace, but it was like a distinctive presence.
Mm.
And there was a river like next to the stream. I remember like, it was almost like my senses became amplified. Like I could hear like so much detail and smell so much. I don't want to take up too much time, but the point is that I think there was something about the spatial nature of that temple and the statues that had been placed kind of in the walk up to that space that prepared me, like almost like Sukkeda Zimra, like prepares us when we're like warming up to pray on Saturday morning. There's something about going to a space where you've already been primed, you've already been told like this is a space where God resides, that maybe gets us ready to meet with God in a way that, you know, sure, God is everywhere, but like we're not always like, ready to connect with God.
Okay, all right. Very deep, very vivid. I feel like I'm there. But very vivid description of this temple and the way that a temple and temples have icons, often religious iconography, that are meant to evoke a kind of a feeling, a spirit, so that you can get yourself ready to, someone said this earlier, these are like prepare you to experience the presence of God. And we see statues in all kinds of temples. And as you were talking, Allison, I think I saw Matt put in the chat, finally Matt got heretical and puts in the chat that these are guardians for the doorway. And no, but Matt's exactly right? We can't leave a discussion about cherubs without thinking of another kind of fortress or temple that uses icons and statues, which is Egyptian. Okay, and you probably have in your mind when you think of like the sphinxes and the pyramids, these sorts of guards that are stationed outside of Egyptian tombs. And here's an image of one that is on King Tut's tomb. Okay, and if this doesn't remind you of a cherub, right? There, I mean, that look, the wings and the faces and. Right, so this is different than what Allison was talking about, because this is not a temple but a tomb. But it is true that many temples have these sorts of statues of lions or birds or guards, and they're there to guard, but they're also there to create a sense of regal presence. Right now, the Israelites just came from Egypt, so it's kind of obvious that there's a connection there, but why would we? Again, the problem for us is idolatry, isn't it? How can idolatry be allowed in the temple, right? Esra.
Yeah, so I maybe kind of taking off of Allison's, Allison, you were saying something and it activated a thought in me, I love that story, by the way. you know, we can think of it as guarding, but what if we also think of it as containing? So what the Kruvim are doing is they're containing holiness, and they're creating a boundary. And so there's this tension in Judaism, and it's kind of cool to see that maybe this is there from like earliest texts to practice today, that we, you know, we have this notion of the divine that's like, you can't see it, you can't point to it, but then we try to use language and, you know, certain texts try to describe the divine. And so I think what's cool here is like there's a playful dance between the tension of divine cannot be named or contained, but it also can. Like it's kind of embracing this paradox, you know, that there is a meeting place. And so the visual cue there is there to remind us of the divine, like the ambiguity about the Kruvim. Maybe anyone could be a Kruvim, you know, each of us could be a container of divine, where the divine like resides and dwells, which is, I know, an old trope. I'm not the first to kind of throw that idea out there, but it's cool to see how these texts can be kind of maybe capturing that, you know, that reality that divine is both extra out of body experience and very embodied experience, whereas, you know, Allison was saying everything, her senses became sharpened, you know, and so Judaism, I think, does a really nice job. You know, we're a faith that also includes praxis. You know, we put on certain kinds of garments to remind us of the divine. So there's a nice playful dance between it's embodied, it's in your body, you use your body, and it's out of body, and it's contained and it's not contained. So
good. That's that playful dance that you describe takes us to a certain kind of theological argument that we've seen some versions of surface once or twice already, but let's just speak it out, which is the idea that perhaps the Torah does prohibit idolatry, except if the Torah allows it, which is to say, statues are not okay to just make, you know, but it's okay if it's in the temple. And the function of a statue or of an idol is as a kind of a preparation. I mean, Alexander was saying it's a kind of a medium to begin to summon your consciousness towards the receiving of God, which is so hard to do because our God is abstract. And so, you know, we often oversimplify our prohibition on idolatry. And so, you know, Jesus is idolatry and Hinduism is idolatry. Every other religion is idolatry. But the truth is, if you ask a sophisticated Christian or Hindu, they will tell you, no, that's not God, the statue. It's a way of bringing me into that consciousness so that I am aware of God. But I need, you know, we're human beings. We need some kind of physicality to get us there. And perhaps the Torah is allowing for that in this one place, right? Maimonides, by the way, says something similar about the sacrifices themselves, right? Which are pagan practices, appear to be pagan practices. Maimonides says, yeah, but they weren't ready to just meditate on the oneness of all. They were just coming out of Egypt. So the Torah gave them more basic remedial forms of religion and then directed them towards, like, yeah, you can build an idol as long as the idol is in service of God, right? And that's that kind of delicate, that playful dance. Okay, I'm excited to call on Kathy Kobayashi because Kathy is always bringing us back to the Garden of Eden in these classes. So what do you make of all this?
Yeah. Actually, it's the comparing the two different texts, and I see all the, you know, the commonalities between them. But it seems to me that there's a very huge difference between the two, in that, you know, with the Mishkan, it's protecting the Torah, which we are supposed to be following and knowing and, you know, do. And then, but the protection in the Garden of Eden is the tree of life, which they're there to keep us from it. You know, that it would be this terrible thing if people were to access it. So it seems to be, on the one hand, you know, like, you know, totally, totally different purposes. Now, I do think it's interesting that the tree of life then becomes a synonym for the Torah. So clearly something's going on, but the tree of life initially is really prohibited. And it kind of makes me wonder if this has something to do with, sort of I don't know exactly, Messianic age or the end of time. In other words, the tree of life, you don't really get to until the end days, right? The end of time.
Right.
But so maybe that connects it, but I think it's, the tree of life is prohibited. Yeah.
I love that, right? Because if these two scenes are connected, then we have to think about, they're not just like each other, we have to think about their sequencing in the narrative. And the first appearance of cherubs was to keep you away from the tree of life. Is the tree of life the Torah? Is the tree of life, I don't know, something else divine? Is it eternal life? It's hard to say, but the cherubs are keeping you out, and now you have access to something. Now the cherubs are still protecting it, but God is going to come down into this space, right? And Allison said this earlier. There's a, in the Garden of Eden, there's a sense that we were close to God, or not we, but Adam and Eve were able to experience the presence of God. And then they were driven away from that. And so is the tabernacle a return to Eden? Is the tabernacle, or the appearance of the cherubim a way of saying, okay, come on back, come on back? I think that the phrase, "V'no'adati lecha sham," I will meet with you there, right? The there has a kind, I've always felt has a kind of an echo, like maybe it's there, right? Like go back to the doorway, right? Let's go back into the Garden of Eden, right? So there's like, that's a wild and exciting thought. Randy Weiss.
So I feel, David, like I need your help with this, because every time I read this, and I guess Kathy just helped me a little more with it, this idea of sealing the tablets away always sounds kind of like forbidding and foreboding. It sounds a little like they're there to keep us out. And I can't quite come to terms with the conversation that we've been having. It's not that we just lay them in there and the cherubim are protecting them. There's dafka a gold, a cover there. So we can't just lift it up and get to it. And for me, there's some kind of tension here between the fact that God is coming down and, somehow meeting us there, and really in our presence, and the fact that something is really being sealed away. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and that's a very helpful description of a tension that really has to be present here in this theological map.
It sort of reminds me of something a little that happens a little later when we get into like Vayikra. I've read Reuven Hammer says, we're this religion that's in the Torah based on making sacrifices, but none of us really thinks now. We think now that sounds so pagan. And Reuven Hammer, the big macher in the conservative movement, talks about how if God hadn't given us sacrifices, we wouldn't have even recognized this as a religion. It just wouldn't have, it wouldn't have made any sense to our people back then. And I feel like the same tension is here. Like somehow we're supposed to learn the wisdoms of these tablets of the Torah, but it's almost like we're not ready. We just came out of Egypt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. I want to return to the first piece of what you said, which, as I said, I think you're touching an important tension here, and we sort of alluded to it before, like, it's dangerous, like the Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Like they're going to come out and annihilate us. Like what's in that? What does it mean to? But even like Indiana Jones is like that danger is based on an idea that is that it comes up again and again in the Torah, which is lo yirein adam v'chai. You can't actually encounter God. You can't do it. We don't believe that you can actually witness the present, not just because God doesn't have physical form, but because God is overwhelming. God is annihilating. To really stand before God would be to not exist at all. Because I don't know why. You would merge, or it would just be too powerful. And so remember, after the children of Israel hear the 10 Commandments, they say, we don't want any more of this. You go and you, Moses, get these tablets for us, and we don't, pen namut, lest we die. So there's a tension here. God's gonna come down and be with us. How wonderful, but also how terrifying. What would that mean? And so there's like a real protection there. God's gonna come. Yeah, God's gonna come, but God's coming in a place that is guarded, that is behind a curtain, that is in a box, that is like, yeah, we know it's over there, but like, don't get too close. Don't get too close. So that tension is here, that the cherubim are guarding the experience, which is at once the culmination of our religious aspirations, and on the other hand, our tradition tells us is too great for a human being to possibly be able to contain. I want to turn, I see Elizabeth there, and I think, and her mother, and I think that they're in Jerusalem. So welcome to our class from Jerusalem.
In snowy Jerusalem. I just wanted to add really quickly, there's a lot of the protection and the separation, which we all know, but I also think, going back to something your mother told you, highlight it so I can see it. I think this has a lot to do with pointing to where is important, highlighting a place that something important is happening. Is it to keep us away, to draw us towards? I'm not sure, but to highlight it. This is really important. There's so much going on. We got the 10 Commandments. We've come out of Egypt. There's so much happening. Let's focus on what's really important, and let's highlight it. And perhaps what the physical nature of these cherubim is really to bracket it and tell us, this is it. This is really important. So
that's, you know what's great about that, Elizabeth, is that there's something symbolically like very nice about your interpretation, like the cherub, and it's also physically it works, right? Their wings are sort of like, look right here. This is the thing. This is what's important, and in that sense, it's not just, God will be right here, and that's important, but also remember, yeah, there's a tabernacle, and it's great, and we're going to worship there, we're going to offer sacrifice, but like at the heart of it all is our Torah. At the heart of it all is right inside this box is the memory that we have, the remnant that we have from our encounter with God. And Torah is the continuing remnant of our encounter with God. We don't get to actually like see or embrace God, but we had this experience once, and the Torah is the way that we continue to access this experience. And the cherubim, in that sense, are going like, look right here, right? This is the important part, not the gold, and not the sacrifices, and not, right? What's really important is that this message, this truth that we receive, this wisdom that we carry with us, right? And that we've been carrying with us since the moment of revelation. Okay, we're almost out of time. Florine anticipated this last source, but I did want to leave it, this last source at the end, and I'll just read it one more time because I think it is so beautiful. Rabbi Kahana said that when the Israelites would go up to the pilgrimage festivals, they would pull back the curtain and show them the cherubs who would be intertwined with one another. And they would say, look, your love before God is like the love of a man and a woman, which is amazing. Like, because remember, God meets there, right? And we can like queerify it, right? And the love between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, but like the love between two people, that's where God exists, right? Is what that Talmudic text seems to be suggesting. I'll meet you there. Yeah, like in this structure and between these statues and, and with the Torah and all of that stuff, but also just, I'll meet you there between two human forms is what the is what the Talmud is imagining, and between two human forms that are in embrace, in loving embrace, almost erotic embrace, right? And it reminds us a little bit of the Song of Songs, which is on the one hand this sort of sexy love poem, but on the other hand, Rabbi Akiva famously said, all of the scriptures are holy, but the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies, Kadosh HaKadoshim, right? Same word that we use for that space there where the cherubim rest. So lots to keep thinking about it. We'll return to it again next year and the year after. But thanks for accompanying me on this journey today. Good to see you all, and have a wonderful Shabbat.